In the spring of 1876, in the quiet town of Olympia Springs, Kentucky, the sky opened in the most bizarre and unsettling way imaginable. Instead of rain or hail, what fell from above was flesh, small, red, glistening pieces of meat scattering across a wide stretch of farmland. Witnesses claimed it was as if the heavens themselves had split open and begun shedding fragments of some unknown animal. The incident would soon be remembered as the Kentucky Meat Shower, a mystery that continues to fascinate and unsettle anyone who encounters the story. The first report came from a woman named Mrs. Crouch, who lived on a small farm in Bath County. On the morning of March 3rd, she was outside making soap with her family when the sky suddenly began to rain down strange, bloody chunks. Some of the pieces were as small as a snowflake, drifting lightly to the ground, while others were thick and solid, like slices of beef torn from a carcass. They fell with a soft plopping sound, dotting the yard, the fence posts, and even the leaves of nearby trees. It lasted only a few minutes, but when it was over, the Crouch farm was littered with flesh. Mrs. Crouch and her family were horrified. At first, she thought it might be some kind of divine warning or punishment. Her words, later recorded in newspapers, reflected both fear and confusion. "When meat began to fall from the sky," she said, "I was dumbfounded. I called my husband, and we could scarcely believe our eyes." The family stood in stunned silence as the pieces of raw flesh clung to the ground around them, glistening in the sun. News of the event spread quickly. In the 19th century, unusual phenomena often drew immediate attention from both local townsfolk and the press. Within days, newspapers across Kentucky and beyond were publishing stories about the meat that rained from the sky. The descriptions were vivid and unsettling. Some claimed the pieces resembled mutton or venison, while others swore it looked like beef or even human flesh. The lack of certainty about its origin only deepened the unease. Reporters, fascinated by the grotesque spectacle, dubbed it the Kentucky Meat Shower, a name that captured the bizarre blend of horror and absurdity that surrounded the incident. Curiosity soon replaced shock. Locals came to the Crouch farm to see the strange remains for themselves. Some dared to touch the pieces, describing them as spongy and fibrous, just like fresh meat. Others went even further. Braver or perhaps more reckless souls actually tasted it. Reports circulated of two men who cooked samples over a fire and claimed it tasted like mutton. Another insisted it had the flavor of venison. Such details gave the story a surreal, almost nightmarish quality, as if the boundaries between the natural and the impossible had momentarily dissolved. But the question remained: what exactly had fallen from the sky? If it was indeed meat, what kind of meat was it, and how had it ended up descending from the heavens? Scientific explanations were sought, and samples of the meat were preserved and sent to experts for examination. The Crouch farm became, for a short time, an impromptu laboratory where curiosity seekers, scientists, and journalists all gathered to study the bizarre fragments. Early analyses were inconclusive. Some experts suggested the pieces were lung tissue from a horse or cow, pointing to the spongy, airy structure of the samples. Others argued that certain pieces were more solid, resembling muscle rather than organ meat. One chemist declared that he had identified cartilage and connective tissue, strengthening the argument that the material came from some large animal. Yet without modern forensic tools, the exact identification proved elusive, leaving the matter clouded in speculation. Of all the theories proposed, one explanation seemed both grotesque and strangely plausible. Naturalists suggested that the meat shower might have been the result of a flock of vultures. Vultures, they explained, have a known habit of regurgitating food when frightened or startled. If a group of these birds had been feeding on a carcass while flying overhead, and then suddenly vomited in unison, it could have produced the grisly shower of flesh that fell upon the Crouch farm. This idea, though far from comforting, at least grounded the event in natural behavior, sparing it from being seen as an act of divine punishment or supernatural intervention. Still, the image of vultures vomiting so violently and in such quantity that it created a shower of meat over a wide area is difficult to imagine. For the people of Bath County, who had seen it with their own eyes, no explanation felt entirely satisfying. The strangeness of the event lingered, etched into memory and local folklore. Even with the vulture theory, questions remained. How could the pieces have been scattered so widely? Why did some samples appear to be muscle while others looked like organ tissue? And perhaps most disturbingly, why did some tasters insist the meat resembled human flesh? The Kentucky meat shower was more than just an oddity of nature. It became a mirror reflecting the anxieties, beliefs, and curiosities of the era. In a time when science was rapidly advancing but superstition still lingered, the event sat at the crossroads of the known and the unknown. Was it a freak accident of nature, a prank, or a sign from above? The newspapers relished the ambiguity, and readers far beyond Kentucky followed the story with a mixture of fascination and dread. As the story of the Kentucky meat shower spread, the nation became captivated. Newspapers from Louisville to New York ran headlines about the bizarre reign of flesh. The New York Times even covered the incident, its tone both curious and skeptical, noting that such a thing defied all conventional understanding. For readers far away from Kentucky, the event seemed almost like a tall tale, the kind of exaggerated story one might hear from a wandering traveler. But for those who had stood on the Crouch farm and seen the meat fall with their own eyes, it was anything but fiction. Scientists of the day, always eager for an opportunity to investigate unusual natural phenomena, began receiving samples of the strange meat. Dr. Alan McLean Hamilton, a respected physician and neurologist, was one of the first to examine the material. His analysis suggested that the pieces were lung tissue from a horse, or possibly a human. Others disagreed, insisting the samples were more consistent with beef or mutton. Still others suggested it was cartilage or gristle. The debate revealed just how limited the tools of 19th century science were when confronted with such an anomaly. Without modern DNA testing or advanced microscopy, identification relied heavily on subjective observation and the experience of the examiner. One particularly unsettling account came from Dr. L.D. Castenbein, a professor of chemistry in Louisville. After examining a sample, he concluded that the substance was indeed flesh, specifically the lung tissue of a horse or infant. His words carried an eerie weight, for the suggestion that human flesh might have fallen from the sky gave the event a sinister edge. If true, what terrible accident could have scattered human remains across the Kentucky countryside? And yet, Castenbein himself admitted that the identification was far from certain. He leaned toward the more natural explanation, that the material was regurgitated meat from vultures, but his hesitation left room for darker interpretations. The idea of vultures vomiting en masse may sound absurd to modern ears, but naturalists pointed out that the behavior was well documented. Vultures, when threatened or startled, will regurgitate food as a defensive mechanism, both to distract predators and to make themselves lighter for flight. If a large flock of these birds had been feeding on a carcass, perhaps of a horse, cow, or deer, high above Bath County, a sudden disturbance could have triggered a simultaneous purge, raining down flesh on the unsuspecting Crouch farm. The theory, though grotesque, was consistent with known animal behavior, yet even this explanation left gaps. Eyewitnesses reported that the meat seemed to fall in a concentrated area, rather than scattered randomly. The shower covered roughly a 100-yard stretch of land, a detail that some argued made the vulture theory less convincing. Moreover, while regurgitated meat might explain organ tissue and chunks of flesh, it did not fully account for the variety of textures and consistencies reported. Some samples were described as fatty, others as lean muscle, and still others as fibrous and airy. To the townsfolk, it seemed unlikely that such an assortment could come from a single carcass. The incident also stirred theological and philosophical debates. In rural Kentucky, where religion shaped much of daily life, many saw the meat shower as a possible sign from God. Some interpreted it as a warning, a divine message cloaked in horror. Others thought it might be a test of faith, designed to challenge the community's beliefs. Sermons were preached, and conversations in churchyards turned to speculation about the meaning of meat falling from the sky. Was it a punishment, a miracle, or perhaps a reminder of humanity's smallness in the face of the unknown? For the local community, the event became both a source of pride and embarrassment. On one hand, Olympia Springs was suddenly on the map, its name carried across the country in newspaper columns. Visitors came hoping to see remnants of the shower, or at least to stand on the farm where it had occurred. On the other hand, the story was often treated with ridicule, as outsiders mocked the idea of meat raining from the heavens. Some locals worried that their town would be forever associated with a grotesque curiosity rather than anything noble or dignified. In the years that followed, the Kentucky meat shower remained an unsolved riddle. Scientific explanations failed to fully satisfy, while supernatural interpretations were too vague to settle the matter. The truth seemed suspended in the air, as elusive as the falling meat itself. What endured most strongly was the image of that March morning, a quiet farmyard transformed into a scene of surreal horror, with chunks of raw flesh drifting down like snow, startling those who had never imagined the sky could hold such a thing. The strangeness of the incident resonated far beyond Bath County. Across America, it fed into a growing fascination with the odd and unexplained. The late 19th century was a time when people were captivated by mysteries of nature. Strange rains of frogs, fish, and stones had all been reported in different parts of the world. The Kentucky meat shower joined this catalog of curiosities, standing out as one of the most gruesome. Unlike frogs or fish, which at least were whole and recognizable, the shower of meat was visceral, bloody, and disturbingly suggestive of violence. Even today, historians and scientists revisit the event with curiosity. Some accept the vulture theory as the most logical explanation, while others see it as an unsolved mystery that continues to defy simple answers. In the absence of definitive evidence, the Kentucky meat shower has taken on a mythic quality. It is remembered not only as a bizarre occurrence, but as a story that reflects the tension between science, superstition, and the human need to make sense of the incomprehensible. In the decades that followed, the Kentucky meat shower of 1876 transformed into something more than just a historical curiosity. It became a piece of folklore, retold in kitchens, classrooms, and even tourist pamphlets. For many, it symbolized the strange unpredictability of nature and the way reality can, on rare occasions, slip into something resembling a nightmare. People are used to the idea of fish or frogs falling during storms, but meat, bloody, raw, and unsettling, touched something deeper in the imagination. It carried connotations of violence, of sacrifice, of flesh ripped from bone. It was not simply bizarre. It was grotesque. Writers and storytellers of the late 19th and early 20th centuries picked up the tale, often embellishing details to heighten the sense of mystery. Some described entire chunks of meat as large as a human hand dropping from the sky. Others claimed that local dogs feasted on the remains, or that farmers salted and preserved the meat to keep as a memento. These embellishments, whether true or not, reflected how the human mind grapples with the unbelievable. The stranger, the story. The more people wanted to make it even stranger. What makes the Kentucky meat shower particularly compelling is the way it sits at the intersection of science and folklore. On one side, naturalists tried to frame it as a biological event, vultures vomiting under duress, an unpleasant but ordinary act of nature. On the other side, communities infused the story with symbolism, imagining it as a divine omen or supernatural occurrence. Both explanations, though vastly different, served a similar purpose. They attempted to give meaning to the incomprehensible. Humans, after all, are meaning-making creatures, and when faced with events that defy reason, We reach for the tools we have, whether scientific analysis or spiritual interpretation. Even modern readers can sense why the event is so difficult to shake. Unlike other strange rains, of fish, stones, or even blood-colored water, the Kentucky meat shower was intimate. Flesh is the stuff of our own bodies. To see it falling from the sky forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about mortality and the fragility of the human form. The shower of meat blurred the line between the natural world and the human body, evoking fears that the heavens might at any moment disgorge something horrifyingly familiar. In 2007, more than a century after the incident, writer and researcher William Corliss revisited the story in his book, Handbook of Unusual Natural Phenomena. He placed the Kentucky meat shower alongside other bizarre meteorological reports, treating it as one of the strangest events ever recorded. By then, the vulture theory was widely accepted among scientists. Yet Corliss and others admitted that questions remained unanswered. Why was the meat described in such varied forms? Why did some samples resemble lung tissue while others resembled muscle? And why did eyewitnesses insist that the pieces drifted down like snow, as if falling from great height, rather than dropping suddenly in a clump? These questions preserved the aura of mystery, ensuring that the story would never be fully resolved. In some ways, the persistence of mystery is what keeps the Kentucky meat shower alive in popular imagination. If scientists had conclusively proven that the meat came from vultures, or if a nearby farmer had admitted to some elaborate prank, the story would have lost its power. But because it resists total explanation, it continues to haunt the curious mind. We are left with an image that is both absurd and terrifying. A farmyard in spring, the air still and quiet, and then, without warning, pieces of raw flesh drifting from the sky. The legacy of the event also reflects how communities process the extraordinary. For the people of Bath County, the meat shower became both a source of local pride and a reminder of the uncanny. Some residents embraced it as a quirky piece of history, a tale to amuse visitors. Others preferred not to speak of it, finding the memory unsettling. Yet even those who dismissed it as exaggerated gossip could not erase the fact that multiple eyewitnesses, independent of one another, had seen it happen. The sheer number of consistent testimonies gave the story weight, making it impossible to dismiss outright. Today, the Kentucky meat shower is remembered less as a scientific puzzle and more as a story that bridges the worlds of fact and legend. It appears in books about American folklore, in documentaries about unexplained phenomena, and in countless retellings on the internet. Each version adds its own shading, its own interpretation, yet the core remains the same. In March of 1876, in Olympia Springs, meat fell from the sky. There is something oddly poetic in the way the story endures. It reminds us that the world is still capable of surprising us, that even in an age of satellites and science, we are not immune to the surreal. The Kentucky meat shower is not just about meat falling from the sky. It is about the human response to the unexplainable. It is about fear, curiosity, and the eternal struggle to make sense of a world that often refuses to fit neatly into our categories of understanding. As we look back on that strange day in 1876, we are reminded that history is not only shaped by wars, inventions, and grand political movements, but also by moments of bewildering oddity that capture the imagination of generations. The Kentucky meat shower may never be fully explained, and perhaps that is for the best. Its power lies not in certainty, but in mystery. For more than a century, it has hovered between science and myth, fact and folklore. A reminder that sometimes the sky itself can open to reveal the unimaginable.